The Haunting in Room 13. It was my first semester in college, and like most freshmen, I was assigned a random roommate. I didn't know much about my roommate, Mark, except that he was a quiet guy with an affinity for reading and a penchant for keeping to himself. We both moved into room 13 of the old dormitory building, which had a reputation for being a little eerie, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The first few weeks went by smoothly. Mark and I were both focused on our studies, and we rarely crossed paths. However, as the semester progressed, strange things began to happen. It all started with subtle noises in the middle of the night. At first, I thought it was just the old building settling, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct. It was as if someone was moving furniture or whispering in hushed tones. One night, I was jolted awake by the sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes to see Mark standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes wide and vacant. He didn't say a word, he just stood there, staring at me. I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't respond. He turned and walked out of the room, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway. I was thoroughly unnerved by this encounter and decided to talk to Mark the next day. When I asked him about the previous night, he seemed bewildered and had no recollection of being in my room. He apologized for any disturbance he may have caused but assured me that he had been asleep all night. As the days passed, the disturbances escalated. Objects in our room would move on their own, and strange shadows would flicker across the walls. I could hear eerie whispers coming from the corners of the room. Mark and I both began to lose sleep, and our academic performances suffered. One evening, Mark confided in me. He revealed that he had been experiencing vivid nightmares involving a sinister presence in our room. He described a shadowy figure that would hover over him as he slept, whispering dark secrets into his ear. He was convinced that whatever was haunting him had somehow latched onto our room. Desperate for answers, we reached out to the resident advisor and shared our eerie experiences. The advisor, though skeptical, agreed to conduct a cleansing ritual in our room, hoping it would put an end to the disturbances. During the ritual, we could feel a palpable tension in the air. The room seemed to grow colder as strange symbols were drawn on the walls. Incense filled the air, and the advisor chanted incantations in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, the room shook violently, and a blood-curdling scream echoed through the dormitory halls. When the ritual was complete, the disturbances ceased. Mark and I were finally able to sleep in peace, and our room no longer felt haunted. We never did discover the origin of the malevolent presence, but we were grateful that it was gone. As the semester came to an end, Mark and I decided to move out of room 13. We may never know what lurked in that room, but we were certain that we didn't want to find out. The autumn semester had just begun, and Emily was excited to start her college life. She had moved into a cozy apartment on the outskirts of campus, sharing it with two roommates, Sarah and Mike. They were strangers at first, but the initial awkwardness quickly faded as they bonded over late-night pizza and binge-watching TV shows. As the weeks went by, Emily couldn't shake an uneasy feeling about Sarah and Mike. She started to notice strange behaviors that raised her suspicions. They often whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, and their laughter would abruptly stop when she entered a room. Emily, always the curious type, decided to investigate. One evening, she arrived home early and crept towards Sarah's room. The door was slightly ajar, and Emily strained to hear their conversation. She was met with hushed voices discussing her in a worried tone. "She's acting so strange," Sarah whispered. "Have you seen the notes she's been leaving around? It's all about conspiracies and being watched." Mike responded, "I know, and did you see the cameras she installed in the living room? This is getting out of hand." Emily's heart raced as she retreated from the door. Her roommates were talking about her behind her back, accusing her of paranoia. But Emily had a secret she hadn't shared with anyone. She was indeed paranoid, but not in the way they thought. Emily had grown up in a family that believed in government conspiracies and secret organizations. She had been groomed from a young age to be cautious of anyone, even her closest friends. Her father's obsession with conspiracy theories had deeply influenced her, and she couldn't escape the feeling that someone was always watching. One night, Emily couldn't contain her paranoia any longer. She confronted Sarah and Mike, admitting her fears and confessing that she had been leaving those notes around the apartment. She explained that she installed the cameras to protect herself from whatever she believed was lurking in the shadows. Instead of being understanding, Sarah and Mike exchanged worried glances. Emily felt a growing sense of dread. They accused her of going too far and not trusting them, which only confirmed her fears that they were part of the conspiracy. The apartment became a battleground of mistrust and tension. Emily became increasingly erratic, convinced that her roommates were spying on her. Sarah and Mike were afraid to be alone with her, fearing her unpredictable behavior. One fateful night, Emily reached her breaking point. She locked herself in her room, surrounded by walls covered in newspaper clippings and red string connecting them. Her roommates heard her whispering to herself and pounding on the walls. Terrified, they called the campus authorities for help. When the authorities arrived and forced open Emily's door, they found her huddled in the corner, wide-eyed and trembling. The walls of her room were covered in a web of conspiracy theories and surveillance equipment, none of which were functional. Emily had completely lost touch with reality. Emily was taken to a psychiatric facility for treatment, while Sarah and Mike moved out of the apartment, leaving behind the unsettling memories of their time living with the paranoid roommate. As they walked away from the apartment, they couldn't help but wonder if Emily's paranoia had been a self-fulfilling prophecy.